This is Mrs. Miller, your teacher at ELA Academy. In today's installment of the Grammar series, we'll talk about objects. We've already talked about objects in two places, the verbs video and the prepositions video. We saw how a transitive verb has an object, which receives the action, just like each preposition has an object. Other grammatical structures can have objects as well, like infinitives or gerunds, but today we're going to keep it simple. Some of what you see will be a review from previous videos so that we can focus on what objects have in common, but later we'll go over new material. When you're looking for objects, keep in mind that an object will answer the question, what? You might remember this slide from the prepositions video. The yellow words are prepositions and the blue words are their objects. Remember the question we ask? The astronaut is floating in what? In the ship. Ship answers the question in what, so it is the object of the preposition. Pretty simple. Now let's review the objects of verbs. In the verbs video, we only covered one kind of object, and I didn't tell you what kind it was because the focus there was on the verbs. But those were all direct objects. Now, just like on the last slide, objects are blue because generally they are nouns or pronouns. But that isn't always the case. Let's look at some examples. Nolan Ryan threw baseballs. He threw what? Baseballs. So baseballs is the direct object. In this case, the object is a noun. What about this one? He threw what? He threw them. This object is a pronoun. I like what? Pizza, also a noun. I like what? The Hawaiian barbecue pizza from Papa John's. Oh boy. Well, this is something we haven't talked about yet, but we'll cover it in the next video on phrases. This is what we call a noun phrase. It's a noun, pizza, along with all the modifiers and other things that help to describe it. We can certainly break it down into various parts of speech. Pizza's a noun, then we have a couple of adjectives, Hawaiian barbecue, and a prepositional phrase, from Papa John's. But regardless of the different parts of speech, they all work together to describe one thing, a particular pizza. So it's a noun phrase, and this whole noun phrase happens to be the direct object of this verb. We can also simplify it and substitute a pronoun, it. Let's look at some other direct objects that aren't simple nouns or pronouns. I like reading. Reading is the object, and yes, it's a noun, but it's a special kind, a gerund, an ing verb that acts like a noun. Sometimes people mistake these for verbs. Here's one kind of like the Hawaiian barbecue pizza sentence. I like reading science fiction novels. This is a gerund phrase similar to a noun phrase. The whole phrase is the direct object. What about, I like to read? Same thing. We have an infinitive, to plus a verb, but it's acting like a noun. To read is the direct object. I like to read science fiction novels. This is an infinitive phrase, which is also the direct object. Again, check it. I like what? I like to read science fiction novels. Direct objects are pretty simple. What might be a little trickier is when we add indirect objects to the mix. An indirect object receives not the action of the verb. It receives the direct object. Let's look at an example. The teacher handed the exams to the students. The verb is handed. The teacher handed what? The exams. That's the object that the teacher picked up with her hand and distributed, so it's the direct object. But where did she move the exams to? The students. She didn't pick up the students and hand them around, so they aren't direct objects of the verb, but they do receive the action indirectly via the exams. So students is the indirect object. Now, let's use that same sentence, but add some adjectives to make the sentence more complex. The teacher handed the final exams to the nervous students. Exams is still the direct object, and students is the indirect object. Now let me show you where this can get confusing. Sometimes the indirect object can come before the direct object. The teacher handed the nervous students their final exams. But even though the objects have switched places, that doesn't change what they are. Exams is still the direct object because it's the thing the teacher picked up and handed out. Students is still the indirect object. Let's look at a way to remember this. So the easiest pattern is this. The subject verbs the direct object to the indirect object. The teacher gives the exam to the students. When it's in this order, there's going to be a to or for in there. The direct object receives the action of the verb, then transfers that action to the indirect object. The same holds true when you reverse the objects. The subject verbs the indirect object, the direct object. The teacher gives the students the exam. Notice that there is no to or for in this pattern. Okay, enough examples, let's practice. Since you can get practice with objects of the preposition in the prepositions video, we're just going to focus on direct and indirect objects. Our first excerpt comes from President John F. Kennedy's inaugural address. Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty. Pause the video and find as many direct and indirect objects as you can. This is one where it would be a good idea to print out the excerpts. You can find a free copy to download at the blog post linked in the video description below. Underline each object and write DO for direct object and IO for indirect object. If you want, draw the arrows like we did earlier. Come back when you're ready to check your answers. Ready to check? Let's see how you did. Let what? Let every nation. We shall pay what? Any price. Bear any burden. Meet any hardship. Support any friend. Oppose any foe. All of these are direct objects. Let's try another one. This is an excerpt from Chapter 1 and Chapter 3 of Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. The main character, Pip, runs into an escaped convict while he's wandering around. The convict threatens him in order to get his help. He picks Pip up by the ankles and tells him he'd better get him some food and a file to cut off his prison shackles. Here we go. You get me a file. He tilted me again. And you get me whittles. He tilted me again. You bring 'em both to me. He tilted me again. Or I'll have your heart and liver out. He tilted me again. And then Chapter 3. His eyes looked so awfully hungry, too, that when I handed him the file and he laid it down on the grass, it occurred to me he would have tried to eat it if he had not seen my bundle. Okay, pause the video and find as many objects as you can. Come back when you're ready to check your answers. Ready to check? Here we go. This excerpt has both direct and indirect objects. Let's look at the direct objects first. Remember, these are the ones that receive the verbs directly. The convict wants Pip to get what? A file. And whittles. That's victuals, a backcountry word for food. Bring them both. He tilted what? Me. And he does this a few times. Here and here and here. If Pip doesn't bring them both, the convict will have what? Pip's heart and liver. What does Pip hand? The file. He laid what? He laid it. He had seen what? The bundle. Now let's look at the indirect objects. Get the file for whom? For me. Get the whittles to whom? To me. Bring them both to whom? To me. In the second part, Pip handed the file to whom? to him. How did you do? If you need more help identifying objects, check out my blog post for links to several helpful websites. I hope this video has helped you to understand objects. Be sure to subscribe to my channel and follow me on social media so that you'll be the first to know when I post new content. And if you like what I'm doing here, please consider supporting ELA Academy on Patreon. This is ELA Academy.